Mr. Cusick, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Best.
Present.
Mrs. Davis.
Present.
Mrs. Hudson.
Present.
Mrs. Lloyd.
Present.
Mr. Wilson.
Here. All right. Welcome everyone who's here on another beautiful summer night. To my far left, your far right, is Board Member Kelly Davis. Next to her is Board Member Jennifer Best. To my left, your right of me, is our treasurer, TJ Cusick. And I am Charlie Wilson, board president. To my right is Dr. Trent Bowers, our superintendent. Next to him is our board vice president, Nikki Hudson. And next to her is board member Amy Lloyd. All right, if you'll join me, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda. I'm not aware of any changes, deletions, additions, comments, questions. If not, Mr. Cusick, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes.
Mrs. Lloyd.
Yes.
Mr. Wilson.
Yes. Now is the public comment portion of our meeting. And again, this is something that we're not required to do, but because our board is and our administration is very interested in hearing the views of community members, we take this opportunity for the board and the administration to hear public comments by our community. At this, we have one speaker, so I would ask Mr. Farley to please come up here so we can Okay, at this time, we will have the first reading of the school calendar for the year 2024-2025, not the upcoming year, but the year after that. Mr. Banks.
Good evening. After following our process of developing multiple options and collecting input from the community, our teachers, our support staff, and our administrators, we would like to make a recommendation for the 24-25 school calendar. Over the last decade, we have attempted to provide consistent start times in mid-August with a 3-day first week to assist students in transitioning back to school. We have also attempted to honor our negotiated agreements, balance the 2 semesters, and provide consistent 5-day weeks to maximize learning. This year, we presented 3 options for calendars to our community and employees. We had over 1,400 community members cast votes and over 800 employees. All of those groups selected option B as their preferred calendar. I would like to make a few comments about this calendar. We still plan to hold our Teacher Professional Development Day on Election Day in the fall of 2024. It will be a presidential election. However, we continue to pursue possibilities that would allow us to move that Professional Development Day in future calendars and hold that training at an alternative time. Based on the feedback from our teachers during the negotiations process, we have identified specific parent-teacher conference days and aligned those in lieu of days in both October and February. This will result in 2025 in a 4-day weekend in February, similar to other districts in the surrounding area. And then finally, based on significant construction at Thomas Worthington, we are exploring alternative start procedures at Thomas Worthington for the first 13 days of school. We have determined that remaining consistent with our starting date of mid-August will keep all of our construction projects on schedule and keep the schedule consistent with all students in the district. Our new Director of Secondary Education, Emily Greenwald, Principal Scully, and myself continue to explore options that could include remote, hybrid, or blended learning during these first 13 days. We do intend to have access to our new academic wing on September 3rd in 2024.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions, comments by any member of the board?
I have a question.
Sure.
So we've gone through the process, you communicated and got good feedback from staff and community members, and now there has been an overwhelmingly response for option B. So in this time period, then do you communicate out that option B has been presented to the board and will go for vote to get feedback in between time of
Yeah, correct.
the next meeting?
Yeah, we have made it public, and we can put that on our website that we are presenting that for the next board meeting, that option B. And we will have copies both in color and black and white for our community.
Thank you.
I guess I have a similar question to that, but what you talked about in terms of the delay of the start of school for Thomas Worthington, will that be communicated out at that time, or how?
Yeah, there's a lot of planning that needs to take place this summer. There are a lot
I understand the details. I just mean the fact that that's
Sure.
going to happen.
Yeah, it makes sense to release that with the release of this calendar.
Okay. Because it's not currently on here, right?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing anything that it noted.
I guess to be crystal clear, that delay you're talking about is for this particular calendar year with the opening of the academic wing, not for this coming August.
Correct.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's in 2024. And do you have a rough idea when? I realize there are an enormous amount of moving parts and getting it all, and you're going to be working hard on it over the summer. Do you think it's possible by January of 2024 that we'll be able to announce exactly what's going to happen at Thomas in terms of start time in August of 2024?
I don't know exactly what we're going to do, but I think we'll have a much better understanding of where construction's at and what type of access we'll have from our gymnasiums to our academic wing. So that's the challenge of the site. The site's being developed in the middle. We know we're going to have access to our gymnasiums where we could meet with large groups of students. We also know we'll have access to our old academic wing. The question is, how much traffic can we have for those 13 days between those two sites? So once that's determined, I think more details could be released to the public.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you very much. And this will come up for board vote at the next board meet. Well, not, yeah, the next board meeting, the 26th, right. Our next board meeting. Thank you very much. All right, at this time, the superintendent's report.
I'm just going to piggyback on that calendar piece for just a second. The decision that we had to make was, do we delay the start time of all of our schools? Like, do we push the entire calendar back? Or do we attempt to do something different with just Thomas Worthington? And we determined that we thought it made sense just to impact Thomas Worthington and not impact the other 20 schools in Worthington. And therefore, we've got this challenge to figure out over the next year with our teachers and our administrators and how we serve kids best. But we did want to make sure that everybody else was able to start on their calendar and continue with that calendar. So. With that, I'll move into our superintendent's report. Our mission in Worthington Schools is to empower a community of learners that will change the world. We have these 4 vision statements that we work through to try to accomplish our mission. And so our first vision statement is that we will engage each student with diverse opportunities to maximize every student's potential. We are into the summer months. But last week, we began our summer learning programs throughout Worthington Schools. We have over 1,000 students engaged in summer learning, from summer enrichment camps, summer reading camps, credit recovery, and get ahead options. Our students and staff had a great first week in summer learning last week, and it's a really cool environment, which is a little more relaxed than the traditional school year environment is. There really were many smiles. And summer learning will run throughout the month of June. And then we have a few of our high school options that will continue in the month of July. Second, we will provide a safe environment where every student can grow intellectually, emotionally, socially, and physically. One of the things that as we look towards next school year, in order to support our students and teachers for next year, I'm excited to say that we have added a second board-certified behavior analyst to our team. So behavior analysts use behavioral methods to decrease challenging, inappropriate behaviors and replace them with more socially appropriate adaptive behaviors. So the ultimate goal of these services is to enable a child to participate successfully in the school environment without the need for additional support. So we have a BCBA on staff. This will be a second BCBA to support students on both sides of our school district. That adds to our mental health counseling teams, behavior teams for support. So we're excited about that. The third vision statements will work to provide consistent communication and promote dialogue with our community. Our spring summer newsletter is at the printer and will be mailed to all Worthington Schools households this week. So we expect it to be in resident mailboxes by the end of this week or early next week. The newsletter provides an update on the end of the school year, highlights some retiring staff members from our school district, and should provide updates to everyone in the community on our ongoing construction projects. So we're excited for our residents to see the newsletter, and we just ask that as they go through their mail, they remember that that should be in there soon. And then finally, our fourth vision statements will be responsible and transparent with our community resources. The summer season for us is critical for completing important physical projects throughout the school district. So the final section of the roof replacements happening at both Perry and Worthingway. McCord classrooms in the older section are receiving new univents, which are the heating and air structures in the classrooms, and new flooring to match the new addition. The McCord track and scoreboard are being replaced. Both Evening Street and Colonial Hills are seeing new big toys installed on their playgrounds as we continue to work our way through playground replacements. 9 of our 11 elementary schools are seeing new blacktop installed for their hard surface playgrounds and then new striping. Slate Hill hallway flooring is being replaced. We're working to replace the exterior signage at Linworth Experiential and Evening Street, and working to replace the parking lot lighting here at the Worthington Education Center. Both Thomas Worthington and Worthington Kilbourne High School are seeing new turf practice fields being installed with lights, and the Thomas Worthington High School locker room project is on track for its August 1st opening. And then, as we know, demolition at Thomas Worthington of that front section will likely occur between this board meeting and our June 26th board meeting. So we don't have that date exactly yet, but sometime in this next 2 weeks, we begin to see some of that building come down. So we're excited about the progress happening with our resources. Dr. Wilson, that's my report.
Thank you very much. The treasurer's report.
That's just another summer for Tim Gehring, right? The monthly financial report for May was distributed to the board on Friday and will be posted to our website. No real surprises there since obviously we just adjusted the numbers to the recent 5-year forecast. But on a positive note in the back, claims for the month were significantly under projections. This could be timing, but it also could be that we're realizing the value and impact from our switch to Anthem's contract. So time will tell, but we're in a good place. As we get into summer, we'll set premium rates later in the fall. We're hopeful to see these claims continue under estimate. Then on a budget and legislative front, a lot of things happening downtown at the State House, which I'm sure Dr. Wilson will mention some of them. Financially speaking, the Senate unveiled their version of the state budget last week, and as expected, their version was slightly higher than the governor's, but significantly lower than the House's proposal. They kept the updated 2022 cost inputs like we urged them to. However, what they did was took away the component that uses median income to calculate the state share of what we get funded. So if you recall, Mr. Maddox asked a good question in the last presentation, why the big difference? And that's really because we share that obligation, so the state comes up with a dollar amount per pupil, so they came up with a higher amount using those 22 inputs. But unfortunately, by taking away the median income average, they basically are saying that we should pay more of that higher cost to educate the students. So we'll see where that goes. We've got 3 proposals. They'll get reconciled over the coming weeks, and we'll have a final budget by July 1st. They also expanded on the governor and House's voucher eligibility program, making them universal. You remember under the governor's proposal and the House's proposal, you had to be on the list of ODE, or the public school had to be on the list, which we weren't on that list. The Senate seeks to do away with that process and make them universal, although they would be on a sliding scale based on income levels. So we'll see where that goes. Also of interest is House Bill 187 that was released at a press conference that seeks to use averages to slow down growth in reappraisal. As we discussed, a third of the districts, including our county, are going through reappraisal this year, which most are anywhere from 30 to 40%. So this bill basically seeks to use an average of the 3 years sales data to try to slow that down. While we all have an interest in ensuring homeowners can stay in their homes after retirement, manipulating what is considered the market value of property, in my opinion, can lead to distortions and unintended consequences. The House, in their budget proposal, wanted to create a commission to study all this and figure out how this could work, which I think is advisable rather than a quick knee-jerk reaction, but we'll see what happens. Just happens today, county treasurers, including myself, met with Auditor Stinziano, and he released district-by-district projections. Interestingly enough, we were an outlier. They showed us at a 36% overall increase, 35% for residential. So every other district, their commercial property was much less than the increase in their residential. We were the opposite. Our residential was being brought up by our commercial. And so I asked some questions on that, trying to get some data. Part of that could be the triennial update that happened 3 years ago. We were low, so maybe that's a catch-up, but we'll see. But that's a good news for us, because as our commercial value grows, that ultimately down the road takes some of the burden off residential payers, so that's good to hear. But we'll see where 187 goes and if it gets worked into the budget. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. At this time, are there any board committee reports or announcements? Kelly?
I'd be happy to start. Amy and I met with the city last week, oh my goodness, last week about the pools, and she'll elaborate a little bit more about that, but it was a good conversation. They presented us with some information, just still very discussion at a very high level right now. And I'm gonna let Amy talk because she'll voice it better. Then Nikki and I met to talk about naming rights with Randy's. Again, very high level conversation to kind of give some guidance now that we've implemented the naming rights policy and just how that will look at an administrative level. So we had, I think, a good and productive start of that conversation. That's really, other than like our goals meeting, which you guys were all there, that's really all I have, I think.
Thank you very much.
Okay, as Kelly mentioned, we attended, I think it was last Wednesday, a pool meeting. And so I thought I'd just provide a brief overview of that meeting. So the basis of it was that Swim Inc. brought in their consultant, Brandstetter, I believe it's Brandstetter and Carroll. Is that right? Yeah. And so they provided kind of an overview of where we are as a community and what some options are to move forward. So basically, they presented three options. The first one was to replace two of the pools and then renovate the pool house. There's a lot of details within that, but that's the gist of it. So it was kind of like a deal with the most pressing issues and then address everything to make it, refresh it, basically. Option two was more all-inclusive and included building actually new structures in terms of buildings to house restrooms and things of that nature. I guess all three of them actually included at least a pool pump. Is that right? Building? Yeah. Because of some of the needs. And then, let's see. Again, some combination of renovation of pools and new pools based upon what is the most dire, basically. And then the third option was all new everything, basically, with some opportunities to potentially create some additional revenue, which that's the part that, as we talk about this, is that there's a lot of pieces still to be figured out. So that's why I think it's best at this point for our board to just understand kind of where these discussions are at this point. Is there anything I missed, Kelly, in that brief overview?
It's just the combination of, like Amy said, the renovation portion of where they're utilizing the space that's already there. And then there's the north pool is the most dire, right? It's the oldest one, it's my understanding. And so I think in option two, even the central pool stays, then the adult pool and the north pool are what they were really looking at, and just kind of updating with the zero entry. So like little details like that. And the other, I would say, most notable change is the changing of the admissions. So where you come in now would be a different location in the future. I think that was in all three of those.
Yeah, no, that's right. And then the only other thing I wanted to add is that we are under the impression, based upon that meeting, that City Council will likely discuss options next Tuesday. They have a meeting on June 20th. And that's when more documents will be available publicly for what those options are. So That's my understanding at this moment in time. Obviously, city council's meeting tonight, so that could be different as we walk out of here later. But that was our understanding, leaving that meeting last Wednesday, was kind of what the next steps will be, so.
Thank you. Nikki?
Oh,
you have something
I was just gonna say, I don't have anything else.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, didn't mean to jump the gun. I was just going to add on to what Kelly shared about our discussion with Randy and just continuing the naming rights. Just to remind everyone that at some point in the near future, there will be a resolution that comes before us that we'll need to improve in order for the funds associated with those naming rights to be designated to the capital project. And that we just continue the conversation, and we talked about this previously, right? This is not something we've historically done within our district. This is a great opportunity in connection with the work that's going on at both high schools and the need to lean into a consultant in this space in order to help us navigate it. And then the third thing I would just add is that, as probably should come as no surprise, whenever you pass something like this, then there are other requests that start coming in. And so we've just recommended that everyone just give us a little bit of grace, us being the entire district, a little bit of grace to get the consultant in, kind of get this going and figure out how it's going to work going forward, if there are going to be naming rights outside of what's done for the capital project. And I don't even know that, but just to give us a little grace to get that up and running. So that was all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Just real quickly, as has been referred to, June 2nd, we had a great work session to discuss and to hear about our goals for next year, 2023, 2024. And I thought it was a tremendous session. We got done, I believe, in slightly under 4 hours. I think my recollection is that was an all-time record. And I really want to thank the administrators that were there and who were presenting. These were great presentations. They were excellent presentations because we were given an enormous amount of reading material, and I thought the summary, it wasn't just telling us what we'd just read or anything like that. I thought every administrator did a great job of presenting that, and so that was exciting. And then to keep the momentum going here, on June 16th, this coming Friday, we have another work session, again at 12:30, and this will be focused primarily on the board handbook, and I assume the policy committee will be leading that. And then as time permits, if it permits, we may discuss some board governance issues. Last week, June 6th through the 8th, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I attended the How to Teach Anti-Semitism workshop that Nikki brought to my attention, at least to all our attentions at the earlier board meeting, and it was a tremendous session. They hope to do it again if they get funding, and we had several teachers from our school district there, and there were a lot of teachers from around this area, a lot from Columbus City and so forth. I would highly recommend anyone who can, especially our teachers, attend next year if they have it. I think everyone there learned a lot. And the one, for 3 days, I could go on quite a bit, but I'll just focus on one thing, and that was a surprise, certainly to me. I hadn't really focused on it, and I don't think many people in the room had either, and that was that in the 1920s and 1930s, as anti-Semitism was increasing in Germany, and as the Nazis came to power, Jews constituted less than 1% of the German population, indeed less than 0.8% of the entire German population. And the focus of the workshop was making connections and seeing the parallels between the past and the present. And obviously the parallels between Nazi Germany and today are rather easy, and there are a number of them. And so, for example, throughout history, the pyramid of hate has looked the same. Words lead to harassment, which leads to violence, which leads to murder. And that has been an historical consequence. So, for example, while less than 0.8% of 1% of the people in Germany were Jewish, it was very easy to use Jews as scapegoats to make it possible for the Nazis to gain power in Germany. It seems to me, and actually there's a lengthy discussion about that, that similarly transgender students, again, constitute less than 3% of our students, but the amount of anti-transgender legislation and rhetoric that we're seeing in our General Assembly is really alarming. And again, an important focus is we're not making any false equivalencies. We don't compare what's going on in the General Assembly to what was going on in Nazi Germany. But but to connect the dots, to see the parallels, I think it's important that we do everything we can to thwart the harassment of our transgender students and not be bystanders, instead be upstanders and stand up for our transgender students. I don't think we can stand by and do nothing as the attacks on our transgender students persist. That was well worth it, and I would urge anybody to go next year if they have it. Yesterday was the memorial service for Dr. David Hopton at the McConnell Art Center, and it was truly an incredible service. He passed away in March, and there was a very large turnout, especially of his former students. He was he's Bronwyn Hopton, or was Bronwyn Hopton's husband, and played a critical role in our theater department at Thomas Worthington for many, many, many years. And I knew he was a talented guy, but he did dozens and dozens and dozens of sets over there at Thomas Worthington, and they were so professional, and they had pictures of all of them, and they were just phenomenal. But anyway, it was an incredible service. Then my final report here is as legislative liaison, as to pick up on where Mr. Cusick was talking about. On last Tuesday, June 6th, the Senate leadership dropped its version of the budget bill. There were a lot of things in the budget bill that in the Senate changes that were somewhat different, and I listened to the report or the webinar by the Alliance for High Quality Education last Friday, and they focused on a number of things. First of all, the Senate bill. Well, this is the proposal by the Senate leadership. It hasn't been approved by a committee or anything else. It's the leadership of the Senate that has dropped this bill. It now goes for committee consideration and vote, and then the full Senate. But it would decrease funding for public schools by $542 million, while increasing voucher funding by $372 million. So even though public school students constitute way over 80%, almost 90% of all our students, and voucher students constitute far less than 10% of our students, it would substantially, compared to the House bill, can substantially increase voucher funding while reducing public school funding. For us, as Mr. Cusick was pointing out, the spreadsheets on the Senate bill proposal has come out, and for us, it would increase, or it would, the Senate bill would provide in fiscal year 24, $21.8 million in funding, while the House bill for fiscal year 24 would provide $25.2 million. So it would provide $3.4 million less funding next year than with the House bill. And for fiscal year 25, the Senate bill would actually drop our funding by $400,000. While the House bill would increase our funding by $900,000. So it goes down by $400,000 under the Senate version and up under the House version. And as Mr. Cusick pointed out, a big reason for the substantial reduction in funding for us is that change in the funding formula from including median income, dropping that all together and just relying on property values and average income. And the reason, if you think about it, a few very high income folks substantially increase your average, but not your median at all. I mean, the example actually that the workshop used was if Les Wexner moves into your district, that changes your average a lot because he's so far above everybody else, but it doesn't change your median, not even by a dollar. So and then you multiply that by 10 or 15, it has a tremendous impact. So it does that. It also removes the funding for a comprehensive study to determine the needs of economically disadvantaged students and the most effective services for meeting the needs of economically disadvantaged students, and a study of the cost to provide those services. As Mr. Cusick pointed out, it does make the voucher program in this state universal eligibility with some means testing for family incomes for high income folks, but they would still get at least 10% of a voucher amount, no matter how high their family income is. It also restores the mandatory student retention under the third grade reading guarantee that had been eliminated in the House version. It also adds the provisions from Senate Bill 1, which would basically render the State Board of Education basically doing nothing but licensing, and the state superintendent of public instruction, which is in our Constitution. That person would obviously still exist, but would have virtually no responsibilities whatsoever. It also, as I'll get to in just a little bit, it also removes the Accelerated Appalachian School Building Assistance Program that was added by the House, and that may have some impact as well, and there was no doubt a reason for that. And then finally, well, not finally, but the last one I'm going to mention is it removes the provision for the Ohio Department of Education to provide reimbursements to make school breakfast and school lunch free for all students who are eligible for reduced priced meals. So it reduces that, or it eliminates that altogether. Now, there are several things going on, as they pointed out in the workshop. First of all, both houses are preparing continuing resolutions in anticipation of the possibility that we won't have a budget on June 30th, but so that the state government won't have to shut down. Just continue at the current year funding with continuing resolution. So there's some thought that they're not going to get done by June 30th. But secondly, the Senate president is lobbying Republican members of the House very hard in hopes of getting to 50 to approve the Senate version of the budget without taking it to conference committee at all, and so that the Senate version would pass as is and without any conference committee. That is something that, at least in the 40 plus years that I've lived in Ohio, they've never ever not gone to conference committee. So that would be a change, but first of all, there's a supermajority of Republicans in the House, so he doesn't have to get all of them. And that is basically to get around the Speaker. The Speaker obviously is opposed to increased funding for vouchers and lots of other things, including, since he's from Southeast Ohio, he's certainly against the removal of the Accelerated Appalachian School Building Assistance Program and so forth. So the dynamics there are interesting. So if they get to 50, we may have a budget just as soon as the Senate passes it and the House concurs, if they can get to 50 Senate Republicans. The House Speaker is strenuously trying to keep that from happening. But that's kind of where we are. So it's, but there still can be some amendments. Basically, apparently what the Senate president is doing is looking for Republican votes in the House, whipping the House. Never before has a Senate president whipped House members, but he's doing that, and he's promising to add things to the budget to get votes. But the main thing is the Senate, the fights between the Senate president and the Speaker are not pleasant, and so he's trying to undercut the Speaker of the House by going around. So these are interesting times, but that's where we are. And basically, school children, public school children all across the state are really, at risk in lots of ways, depending on how this all comes out. So these are interesting times. All right, moving on now to actions recommended by the, unless somebody else had any other comments. Okay. Actions recommended by the treasurer. I'll take a motion to approve the recommendation of the treasurer that the Board of Education approve routine financial items E2 and E3, our minutes and the appropriation modifications. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we accept the treasurer's recommendation. Mr. Cusick, any comments?
No, these are just the minutes and then these transfers, a little higher than usual as we get to the year end and people maneuver their budgets around, but it's no total increase in cost.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions, comments, discussion? If not, Mr. Cusick, will you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson,
Yes.
Mrs. Lloyd,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mrs. Best.
Yes.
Okay, now, may I have a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendation that we approve the consent agenda items F2 through F9?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda. Dr. Bowers. Okay, any questions, comments, discussion? Okay, Mr. Cusick, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Hudson,
Yes.
Mrs. Lloyd,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mrs. Best,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Motion passes. Okay, now then, we are ready for, where are we? Okay, new business recommended by the superintendent, Dr. Bowers.
Yes, I'd like to recommend that you approve item G, the donations listed here on the agenda. Item G, please.
May I have such a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and it's been moved and seconded that we accept the donations listed on the agenda. Any questions, comments? If not, Mr. Cusick, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Lloyd,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mrs. Best,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson.
Yes.
Motion passes. All right. At this time, are there any questions, concerns, requests by the board?
I have two things.
Sure.
So for Friday, I know we mentioned we're going to talk about the board handbook, which we're ready to do. And then you talked about maybe some governance items. So if you would, like last time, you had a lot of items that you wanted to discuss. So if you could send those to us prior to the meeting, that would be
Okay.
helpful for us to have a productive discussion if there's time. The second thing is you sent us committee assignments.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if you've sent that to our administrators yet or not, or if you're waiting for agreement from all of us before sending that on so they know who their liaison will be for those committees.
Yeah, I have sent those to the superintendent, to the treasurer, and they will be on the agenda at the June 26th meeting.
Okay.
And I did, yeah, well, it was version 2. I didn't hear any negative, I heard some feedback, but nothing requesting any changes. So nothing goes there. And I was going to discuss about how we want to do, what best practices are, how, if there's time permitting, I'd like to discuss that on June 12th at our meeting as to how we should do that, especially if we're going to do it in the middle of the year, run at the organizational meeting, and whether what, if anything, we want to vote on.
Okay.
But the intention is definitely to put them on the agenda for the June 26th so they become public. And as far as I'm concerned, or Dr. Bowers can certainly communicate them to the administrators.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that if you're ready. I hadn't done that because I wasn't sure that they were finalized at this point, so I just.
Okay.
My view is they're finalized. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for raising that. Any other concerns, questions, requests? All right. Again, our calendar, this coming Friday, a work session. Then on our regular board meeting on June 26th at 6:30. And then what Dr. Bowers, although the agenda doesn't call it that, on July 10th is is what Dr. Power sometimes has referred to as our irregular meeting, and it's irregular because it's 7:30 in the morning, and we're only going to be taking up if it's needed. We'll only meet if it's needed for personnel matters to approve personnel issues, and we've been doing this the 16 years I've been on the board, and actually they've occasionally been canceled, but they were very short, and so yep. So that will be at 7:30 in the morning. And that's all I know about for scheduling. Anybody else? All right. If not, I would entertain a motion to enter into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we enter into executive session. That is not a debatable motion. So, Mr. Cusick, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mrs. Best,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Hudson,
Yes.
Mrs. Lloyd.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. So we will now move into executive session, and we will not be coming out to do any vote of any kind after executive session. So, except to adjourn. The only thing we will do after executive session is adjourn. There will be no votes, no further discussion, no further public business being occurring after executive session. Thank you all.